so quiet at this park, I could literally hear a pin drop. Hello, it's Sherelle, and this is my road to recovery. There's a squirrel. A lot of my people experience a lot of traumatic things growing up because of the chain reaction of residential schools. There was sexual abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse. They weren't allowed to see their families. They would cut off all their hair because they believed that these children had parasites and lice, and they were cleaning them by pouring gasoline on them. Children were taken away from their families at a young age and grew up with strangers. This would be the church. There would be a girl's side and there would be a boy's side in residential school. The boys weren't allowed to mingle with the girls, and the girls weren't allowed to mingle with the boys. We were taught English and how to write in English, and we were told that we can't speak in our own native tongue. So we weren't allowed to speak our own language. That is why nowadays there's not that many people who know how to fluently speak Cree. If we went back to speaking our native language, we still wouldn't be able to adapt with the rest of the world. That's just how it plays out. They were whipped with belts. If you remember this movie, comment down below, but I forget what the movie was called. This little girl who went to a residential school, her parents actually came to get her from this residential school, and the teachers that were there at this school actually told her parents that she wasn't there, when in fact she was. She tried to go home on a horse with her brother. She had a younger brother in residential school too. They did not make it safe home, and they tried to survive on their own, which is just very sad. Residential school had a lot of long-term effects on my people. We're still adapting to the changes today in history. Because of all the trauma, because of the should've, could've, would've, and instead of focusing on all of the should've, could've, would'ves of the past, I could have done this, I could have done that, I could have did better for this. You're not supposed to focus on all of that because it just puts you back in the spiral. Yeah, residential school was just horrible. One of my relatives was in day school, and they did get abused. In residential schools, they used to hit children with rulers. They put out your hand, and they would take a ruler and smack your hand. So that's not fun. In my opinion, we could have all just intermingled our knowledges together, and we could have been twice as smart with all of that combined, but they didn't choose to do it that way. It was like my way or the highway type of vibe. That's not healthy for anybody. And I know it's a stereotype. Indigenous people, just all they do is drink, they're lazy. At one point, I was the living female Aboriginal stereotype. People don't know actually that alcohol was given by the settlers to Aboriginal people. Alcohol is a depressant. People use it to cope and feel better, when in reality it actually makes you feel sadder than you already feel. It's not a very good coping mechanism. It's actually a codependency. The way that we were treated before in residential school still has an effect on a lot of the kids today, because all that their parents learned was abuse from growing up in residential schools and being taken away from their original parenting. 50 years ago, let's say there was a residential school. A family of 3 children got taken from their home, their Aboriginal family. All that they learned was getting beat if they didn't comply to everything. If they didn't do it, they were beat. So if that's the way that they learn to grow up, and they get sent out and they're raising the next generation, they're free now, but they're raising the next generation. This generation is only taught to beat their kids if their kids aren't listening to them. It's physical abuse, it's mental abuse, it's emotional abuse, it's manipulation tactics. This generation, now they only know how to beat their kids when they're not listening to them. They only know how to abuse people and how to abuse their children. And it's an endless cycle. If their children don't listen to them, they get beat. We're given financial assistance from the government for raising our children, but it's still stuck in our mental. It's very hard as an Aboriginal woman and as an Aboriginal person to break these cycles that were placed in our history, because it's what other way do we know other than what we were taught? It's hard to get hooked up with resources when you don't know where to go and you don't know who to talk to, you don't know what to do. So you don't go searching for help. If you don't seek help, then you're not getting anywhere. A lot of Aboriginal kids have anxiety, not knowing how to talk to people, not knowing how to go and seek help when they need it because they want to deal with all their problems on their own. They want to fix everything by themselves because that's just the way that, we were brought up to be. When really, they don't know what they're doing. Like, all that they were taught was this and that, and they don't even have the correct information or resources to go about life. The cycle continues. If you're not educated as an Aboriginal person, this system will take you. That's why education is so important, and staying away from drinking and drugs. It's hard for my people because we have so much trauma, and it's just the way we were taught how to cope. We were given these things generations ago. Learn how to healthily cope. Therapy is one big one. It's not just Aboriginal people, it's people everywhere around the world. Everybody has addictions. A really good friend of mine who says they don't trust therapy whatsoever, and it's because you talk about it, but what are they actually going to do about it, right? Or so that's what I've heard. Self-harming at a young age, I believe I was 12 years old when I started self-harm. I was given rubber bands, so rubber bands holding ice cubes. These methods do somewhat work, but they're not really efficient or beneficial, I was given a rubber band for my wrist, and you're supposed to snap it. I believe that therapy should come free for Aboriginal people because of all of the built-up trauma everybody suffers from. It affects the financial side of things too, which is another thing. I believe that schools should offer financial education from a very young age. If you're thinking poor, you're gonna attract poor. I wouldn't say you should think larger than life, because sometimes people will think about the 10th step instead of thinking about all the rest of the 9 that you have to take to get to that 10th step, if that makes sense. I want to be here when they haven't even thought about how to get to the 10th step. It's very important to be patient with yourself and others. Patience is a virtue, Anyways, taking a water break. You got me on a ramble. This is really difficult stuff to talk about. It's a really sensitive topic for a lot of people. A lot of people lack education. A lot of people will actually drop out because they're dealing with things and they weren't taught how to cope with those things. They weren't taught how to navigate through life because their parents are still caught up on things too. And their parents can't help them with those problems because they didn't even know how to solve them themselves when they were younger, It's just difficult. So we have to seek help elsewhere outside of our family and outside of people we know. It's very hard to do that when you're a little bit prideful. Very hard to seek help outside of yourself and your family when those are the only people you really trust. The government already fucked us over, so why should we trust other people, right? That's how a lot of people feel. And a lot of what happened then affects a lot that happens today still. I'm going into the field of therapy specifically for this reason. If their parents aren't good at financial management and that's all that they see, then that's all they're gonna know. So I think it's important to have a good financial education starting at a young age. People cope by eating. If they don't want to do drugs or drink, they're gonna eat. Food's good, tastes good. Obesity is also a big thing in the community because people cope by eating. It's not a bad thing, but people cope by eating. They don't want to seek help. It's very hard for people to speak about this kind of thing. You shouldn't give a rat's ass what other people think about you. You really shouldn't, because what is that doing to help you? That topic had me all the way fucked up. Another thing I wanted to talk about is some non-Aboriginal people, I'm not saying all, but some, they actually don't understand why the government just hands stuff to us. No young Aboriginal child has a clue as to why the government hands stuff to us. We're told from a young age that we have some kind of assistance from the government, which leads to youth being conditioned to believe that they will always be taken care of in some form. This is where codependency to financial aid comes in. Well, why are we getting it? Oh yeah, we need the help, right? We need the help because of all the trauma from residential schools. Needing help becomes ingrained in the brain. We begin to believe that the government is making up for everything that has happened in our Indigenous history. When we reach the age of 18, we're no longer given financial aid or financial help, or it becomes minimized as we grow older. Around 18 is where we begin to stress, oh well, how am I going to maintain this? We look for jobs. Say before they reach 18, they already begin struggling with addictions themselves. It becomes even harder to find jobs because nobody wants to hire an unreliable alcoholic who's already proven that they can't manage their finances, right? aka their money is going to feeding their addictions. Some Indigenous people stay in one city all of their life and don't get to experience outside of their city because of this cycle. We don't know why we got stuff handed to us either. For me, it's just, when I think about it, it's really just breeding codependency on the government. And when I turned 18, I was like, oh, how am I gonna do this, my family was focused on their own problems to teach me about adulthood, so I had to seek help elsewhere outside of my family and my friends, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the way we all process things. We all process thoughts differently, emotions differently. We don't process them the same way as other people. Like everybody doesn't process emotions the same. So to anybody who is non-Aboriginal and you don't understand why we get stuff handed to us by the government, it's not our fault. And it kind of has a negative effect anyways, and it's not even a lot financial aid. It's just enough to survive, you guys. So it shouldn't be as big of a deal as people make it seem. As we evolve as a generation, everything starts to cost more, so really it's a very little amount. That's really all I have to say for right now. Bye.